All right, we've got some breaking news, and I never again want to hear a Trump voter say that Biden had a weak foreign policy or was weak on Russia, because I'm going to cut to the chase here. The President of the United States, after meeting with Zelensky right before the Pope's funeral, then sent out a long Truth Social post where at the end of it, he comes to the conclusion, quote, "With all of that being said, there was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, cities and towns over the last few days. It makes me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war. He's just tapping me along and has to be dealt with differently." Trump is coming to a third grade level realization that Putin is not a good faith actor and he doesn't want to stop the war. Dude, what are you talking about here? He says, it makes me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war. He doesn't want to stop the war. He started the war. This dude has an infantile view of how global politics works, and I want to break down his meeting with Zelensky. There's a lot to talk about here, but before we dig into all that, let's listen to Ben Shapiro kind of ripping into Trump for being weak on Russia.
Oh, a couple of days ago, right after we left Ukraine, the Russians launched one of the biggest salvos of the war all across Ukraine. Drones, missiles. One of those missiles struck an apartment complex in Kiev. It killed at least 12 people. This prompted President Trump to take to Truth Social and issue a statement, quote, "Not necessary and very bad timing. Vladimir, stop. 5,000 soldiers a week are dying. Let's get the peace deal done." He said,
weakest president we've ever had, by the way.
"I'm not happy with the Russian strikes on Kyiv." Okay, well, that is not going to get it done. I'm sorry, but yelling at Vladimir Putin over Truth Social is not the thing that is going to get it done. President Trump has been very successful at successfully pressuring the Ukrainians to come to the table.
No, he has with the Ukrainians, okay.
He's gotten Vladimir Zelensky to agree to a 30-day ceasefire. However, when it comes to the actual pressure on the Russians, so far that seems to have been largely in abeyance. In fact, President Trump yesterday was asked directly about this. He was doing a presser in the Oval Office, and he was asked about what concessions Putin had made thus far, because the United States is asking some pretty large concessions from the Ukrainians, ranging from acknowledgement of Russian ownership over eastern Ukraine and Crimea to the possibility of banning themselves from NATO, essentially, and not even getting great security guarantees from the United States or from Europe in the process. That is the proposal that was put on the table by supposed master negotiator Steve Witkoff, who has yet to actually negotiate a successful deal.
By the way, this is Ben Shapiro ripping into the Trump administration. This is his version of it, at least.
Any real sense. Well, President Trump was asked about what exactly is Vladimir Putin putting on the table. Here's President Trump's response.
What concessions has Russia offered up thus far to get to the point where you're closer to peace?
Stopping the war, stopping taking the whole country. Pretty big concession.
That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard anybody ever say.
President Trump then went on to suggest that the big concession from Moscow is that they're not trying to conquer the rest of Ukraine, which is currently untrue. They are trying to conquer the rest of Ukraine. Also, that's not a concession. That's because the Ukrainians are fighting them. It's because over 50,000 Ukrainians have died fighting against the Russians. It is not that Vladimir Putin decided to be a nice guy and not try to take Kyiv or Lviv. It is that Vladimir Putin has been stopped in his tracks by the Ukrainian military, yes, with American financial support, material aid from Europe, as well as the United States.
A lot of people think that Trump is an actual Russian agent being paid or a Russian asset being paid. I haven't seen any actual evidence of that, but what I have seen evidence of is Trump being a literal narcissistic idiot. I've been trying to figure out what his whole MO is with this, and I realized he has the same understanding of this war as some of my high school friends who I have to explain to them what happened in 2014 and what Euromaidan was. Trump doesn't know the underlying historical facts. He genuinely thinks that Vladimir Putin wants to do him a favor, and then as Vlad Vexler says, Trump gets his narcissistic supply from Putin. He looks up to people in positions of power, so when he's meeting with Putin, it's very narcissistic. And I get emails. People say, Adam, the narcissism theory is very weak. I prefer the Russian asset theory. And I understand both, but I think if we look at all of the evidence, the prevailing evidence shows that Trump is a malignant narcissist. I haven't seen any evidence that he's being paid off. But right here it says, what we learned from remarkable photos of Trump-Zelensky meeting. I hate the framing that the mainstream media has been taking with these Trump-Zelensky photos. So they met before the Pope's funeral. The U.S. president has presented Ukraine and Russia with a proposal and ultimatum so one-sided it could have been written in the Kremlin. Very, very true. But all of these news stations keep calling these photos remarkable. Look at these remarkable photos. I reject that framing. Even Caitlin Collins of CNN, who I like, said, remarkable image, and it's a photo of them sitting next to each other. What do you mean remarkable? I see a hero on the right, and I see a coward on the left, being Trump. I see somebody who's been fighting with their country, for their country, for years on the front lines, and I see someone who's been fighting against their country's foundational principles, which is Trump again. So when everyone calls these photos remarkable, you mean like remarkably annoying that Trump has allowed Zelensky citizens to be killed, slaughtered, maimed because he stopped intelligence and weapon sharing because he thinks Putin's in good faith, and now he sits there face to face for a photo shoot. And what I think Trump wants out of this photo shoot is to be known as a historic peacemaker. And you know what? Even Zelensky knows that that's what Trump wants. He wants to be a part of history. I mean, at the end of Zelensky's post, he said, "Good meeting. We discussed a lot one-on-one, hoping for results on everything we covered, protecting lives of our people, full and unconditional ceasefire, reliable and lasting peace that will prevent another war." He then says, "Very symbolic meeting that has potential to become historic if we achieve joint results. Thank you, POTUS." That was very carefully crafted, this sentence. Think about this. He's saying that Trump is going to achieve historic results, and then he says, "Thank you, POTUS." You guys remember the J.D. Vance line, "Why don't you say thank you," or whatever the hell. I mean, he's being very, very specific with his words. And again, these photos are performative on Trump's side. And I think Zelensky is actually sitting there trying to explain the war to him. Like, yo, Putin's not a good faith actor. You can't negotiate with this guy. And Trump's like, yo, are the cameras rolling? Make sure the cameras are rolling. But to go back to this article, on an extraordinary day, remarkable pictures on the margins that capture what may be a turning point for the world. Why are people acting like this is some huge, dramatic? Don't feed into Trump's narrative. Trump has given Putin so much land after saying that he would end the war on day one. He literally just proposed a ceasefire that could have been written in the Kremlin, like this article says. What do you mean this could be a turning point for the world? You mean towards authoritarianism? In the corner of St. Peter's Basilica, before the funeral of Pope Francis, the leaders of America and Ukraine sit facing each other in two solitary chairs. They look like confessor and sinner, except we cannot tell which is which. That's actually a pretty interesting line. Leaning forward, hands together in their laps, Donald Trump and Vladimir Zelensky stare at each other in the photo. In another, the Ukrainian president seems to be remonstrating with the U.S. president. This is their first encounter since their infamous bust-up in the Oval Office. You see this photo right here? I don't know if Trump's actually listening. I mean, I hope for once in his life he's listening to what Zelensky's telling him. I hope he's listening. You know, there's a video of Trump on Air Force One a few days ago where he's being told that Putin bombed Ukraine overnight. And he goes, "You're just telling me that for the first time. I haven't heard that." Like, dude, the president of the United States is finding out about warfare after I am. I knew about it that morning, and Trump didn't know about it 12 hours later. Absolutely disgusting, performative show from Donald Trump. And let's go and read his tweet. We haven't read this. He tweeted out after his meeting this morning with Zelensky, Macron, and a bunch of other leaders. I mean, look at this. It says Macron shook one hand. And if you watch the video, you see that it's not Trump's. That's a long handshake with Zelensky. They shake hands for a while. They literally didn't even shake hands. God, this old motherfucker. Okay, sorry. Going back to his post, he said, "No matter what deal I make with respect to Russia and Ukraine, no matter how good it is, even if it is the greatest deal ever made, the failing New York Times will speak badly of it." Dude, it's not the best deal ever made. I mean, you have no plan. There's no deal. The deal is to give Russia what they want, ease sanctions while Putin rearms. He says, "Little Peter Baker, the very biased and untalented writer for the Times, followed his editor's demands and wrote that Ukraine should get back territory, including, I suppose, Crimea, and that other ridiculous requests in order to stop the killing that is worse than anything since World War II, bro, because of Putin. Why doesn't this lightweight reporter say that it was Obama who made it possible for Russia to steal Crimea? That's not true. We had been pushing back on the Crimea occupation until yesterday when Trump randomly tweeted out in the morning that Crimea is now a part of Russia. He says, "Did Baker ever criticize the Obama Crimea giveaway? No, not once. Only Trump. And I've had nothing to do with this stupid war other than early on when I gave Ukraine javelins and Obama gave them sheets. This is Sleepy Joe Biden's war, not mine. It was a loser from day one and should have never happened and it would have never happened." Dude, it is happening. It is happening right now. You are president. You are not deterring it. You are not stopping it. You don't know what you're you're talking about. You don't know the fundamentals of this war. And he said, with all of that being said, there was no reason for Putin to be shooting missiles into civilian areas, cities and towns over the last few days. It makes me think that maybe he doesn't want to stop the war. Maybe he's just tapping me along and has to be dealt with differently through banking or secondary sanctions or security guarantees for Ukraine. Give Ukraine more weaponry. It's not, everybody wants peace. Everybody, including Zelensky, wants peace, but giving Vladimir Putin what he wants is not peace. Donald Trump thinks that short-term appeasement will lead to long-term peace, meaning if he lets Putin take the land, he'll just cool off, but that's not how it works. Zelensky is asking for long-term security guarantees because Putin has shown time and time again that he will reinvade, as he's doing right now. Trump just seems to understand that now. Okay, the power in my hotel went out, so I'm going to leave it at that. Drop a like, subscribe if you appreciate these hotel videos on the road. I'm grinding for you guys, reporting the news, and I really appreciate everything that you guys have helped me build. Let's keep building throughout the year. Peace out.